membrane sac full of hemoglobin and enzymes, other proteins. At times, the body is under stress to produce additional red blood cells. Either it needs additional oxygen for a short period of time, or it may be some other pathology where it's increased in red cell production, and they're pushed out of the marrow too rapidly before they've lost all of their ER and ribosomal material, and it shows up as these blue strands, and those are called reticulocytes. So the appearance of these in the blood, when you're looking at a sample of blood, indicates the red blood cells were being made too fast and pushed out of the bone marrow too fast.
And what's the purple reticulocytosis that normal?
That's the nucleus.
That's the nucleus being taken out.
Right. So most of our normal frogs, now this isn't all frogs' blood cells do have a nucleus. All right. So they function just fine for whatever the frogs need to do with oxygen. But in humans, we don't have a nucleus. At least once it appears in the blood. Here's one that just loses its nucleus. It's got in there.
Will it not work then? I mean, what's it going to do?
No, it just can't transport as much oxygen with the nucleus in the way.
Well,
You would need even more red blood cells to carry the same amount of oxygen that we have in the nucleus. It gets broken down. All right, so did I miss this slide there? Oh, we'll go back to the previous one because I want to talk about this now.
Oh.
So skip the page. I just want to do this. Okay, Dave, yes.
Why do they say it's so painful when you get your bone marrow taken out?
Because bone has nerve endings, and they need a large size cannula to go into that and withdraw the tissue. So bone cancer is one of the most painful cancers, and it's just we don't think of the number of nerve endings that are present there. Yeah, or I think you have. So here we start with our cycle and you have this diagram in your lecture notes on page 8, with the production of the red blood cells. They leave the bone marrow in wide capillaries known as sinusoids and enter into the cardiovascular circulation. Without a nucleus, they can't divide. All right, so they have a limited lifespan in the blood of about 120 days or approximately 4 months. During that time, they can't repair themselves, and as they age, their plasma membrane becomes more fragile and they get sticky. And so they are broken down by macrophages. And these macrophages are found in the liver and in the spleen. Most of this happens in the liver, but some will happen in the spleen. And the byproducts are either excreted in our waste material or recycled. So the body tries to use the amino acids again. If it's in the liver cell just uses those again. There's a pigment known as bilirubin.
Turns your poop brown.
That's right. This makes your feces brown, makes your skin brown or yellow if you still have it. It's also added to the urine. All right, and gives color to the urine. If the liver is diseased and cannot handle the amount of bilirubin that it has to process, a condition known as jaundice occurs. And that's just the bilirubin, it leaves the capillaries and builds up in the connective tissue. Typically shows up first in the sclera, because those are the whiter areas, and then will also show up in the skin. So this increase in bilirubin can be due to liver disorders, liver disease, because the liver is processing it. So if the liver can't process it, it stays in the blood. Or it can be due to too many red blood cells being broken down. So this is a normal occurrence, happening in the fetus. As we'll see when we get to the respiratory system, fetal hemoglobin is a different kind of protein than adult hemoglobin. One of the protein strands is different because of the fact that it needs to bind oxygen to a greater degree. When the baby's born, it's no longer needed. And so fetal red blood cells start to be broken down in the liver. Also, when the baby is born, if it's held below the level of the mother's heart with the umbilical cord still attached, that increases the amount of blood from the placenta that is transferred to the baby, and that can increase the number of red blood cells that need to be broken down. Okay? So, or if you have some kind of hemolytic disease, such as a malaria parasite that causes red blood cells to rupture, or sickle cell anemia where the red blood cells rupture, that processing can increase and also result in anemia. For infants, it becomes critical only if the rate is really, really rapid. So it's not so much the high level as how long, how fast it gets to that point and how it can cause brain damage in newborns. When I first started nursing, babies were in the hospital with their moms for about 3 days. And when I worked nursery, I worked labor, delivery, nursery, and postpartum, where the mothers were after delivery. When I worked nursery, I would be the one to draw the blood, just a heel stick, and put it on a slide and run it through a machine and determine a basic bilirubin level. And then they would go home and they would have some standard. And the parents were usually instructed, if the baby starts to look yellow, bring it back. Now, babies go home within the first 24 hours, and they usually haven't developed the jaundice. So when my twins were born, I knew about the presence of jaundice. I was teaching a lot. They were born on a Friday, and I went back to teaching on Monday. But I was teaching 1 or 2 classes at 3 or 4 different schools, so about total of 5 classes. But I came home at 10 o'clock on Mondays and Wednesdays, and I had Tuesday free until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I would take the babies one at a time. My mom would come out to stay with me, and my husband and our oldest son, and help take care of the kids till Christmas. But I would come home and take one baby at a time out in the sunshine. They were born in September, so it was warm, and just have them with me on a chest, a little diaper, for about 10 minutes, and then I go back inside again and bring the other baby out. Because your ultraviolet light helps to break down bilirubin in the skin. And this was found out, serendipitous if you will. Some nurses noticed that babies that were closest to the window, now back when I was born overseas, my sister was born a year before I was, and my mother, in a British clinic in the mountains of Burma, my mother had to sign herself out of the clinic after 10 days. And so by that time, certainly if jaundice is going to develop, it would have already developed. And so it would develop in the hospital, in the nursery, and the nurses noticed that the babies whose cribs and bassinets were closest to the window didn't develop it as often as babies that were farther into the building. And so the investigation was started on the effects of ultraviolet light. And so now if the baby has high bilirubin levels, they're put under a bili light, which is basically a UV light. And the babies are, a little black eye mask will be taped around their heads. And then they're put in there with just a diaper and allow the UV light to work through the skin and breaking down the bilirubin.
Studies have been found that they use that, we're putting in that, and use lunch.
Do they? They grow up and... I thought you were going to tell me they didn't need to go because they were naturally. All right, well, let's go back and look at the structure of a single red blood cell. I already told you that its average diameter is approximately 7 microns, 7 to 7.5 microns. And this is good to know if you do a lot of microscope studies, because almost all of our tissues have red blood cells, and you can use it to help estimate the size of other structures and components that you're looking at in the microscope. What is the advantage? This is a really cool piece of bioengineering that the cell does in the cytoskeleton to help to maintain this shape, biconcave shape. What advantage does it have over a sphere? Round ball. Okay, it can pass through passages easier, but most importantly, and I drew this one a little small, most importantly, if we have hemoglobin binding oxygen here in the center of the cell, it's going to take much longer for the oxygen to diffuse into that hemoglobin from the lungs or to the tissues out from the cell. Whereas almost any point in here is not too far from the surface. So there's a greater surface area to volume ratio with that component. And that's illustrated by the light area that you see when you're looking at the cells head on.
So that's
The
why.
molecule,
So
pardon?
that's why it can bind the oxygen.
Well, it combine the oxygen because of the iron in here. What it does is it creates a shorter distance. It increases the efficiency of oxygen transport into or out of the cell. Here's a large view of the hemoglobin molecule. We'll talk about this more in the respiratory system after spring break, because of course that involves oxygen as well and the transport. It's made of two types of hemoglobin, the alpha and the beta. And within these within a whole hemoglobin molecule, is an iron, 4 iron atoms. And it's actually the iron that the oxygen interacts with. Oxygen is an electron-hungry atom. It needs electrons to make it stable, 2 electrons, and iron gives off electrons easily. Right? So what we don't want to happen, and we'll go over this again when we get to the respiratory system, we don't want the oxygen and iron and hemoglobin association to be so stable and of such a high affinity that the oxygen never comes off. And that would be great. We would get 100% saturation at high altitude, but then it would never go to the tissues. So you could be at Mount Everest and get all of your oxygen and all of your hemoglobin bound to oxygen, but it wouldn't do you any good because it would never leave the iron and go into the tissues. So we need this, and it's a unique mechanism by which the oxygen binds at a high affinity in the lungs and comes off more easily in the tissues. This next slide shows the hemoglobin. You can see the 2 different colors. Here is the iron. And so under different conditions, high carbon dioxide, elevated levels of hydrogen ions, higher temperature, that decreases the affinity for oxygen, changes the shape of the hemoglobin molecule, and makes it easier or more difficult for the oxygen to bind or leave. And so we see those changes occurring in the lungs versus the tissues. And we'll go over those when we get to the respiratory system. All right, so let's look at some causes of changes in the number of iron molecules. So skip over page 10, we'll come back to it. Page 12. Now, one of the activities in your lab is to measure, pretend you're measuring an actual capillary tube, and determine the hematocrit. And then for male or female, is it an abnormal value? So males tend to have a higher number of red blood cells. Anybody know why?
More muscle.
More muscle mass, more testosterone creates more muscle mass, which means more mitochondria, ATP requirement, and oxygen requirement. All right. And so if it's a high hematocrit and too many red blood cells, I want you to give me a cause. And I don't want you to just say polycythemia. All that means is too many red blood cells. Or if it's too low a number, I don't want you to say anemia, because that's what that means. It's just too little red blood cells. So give me a cause of polycythemia or a cause of anemia, okay? And I have that written into the lab. So, not enough, our normal range of red blood cells
4.5 to 5.5. Oh no, right.
is approximately 4.5 to 6 million cells per cubic millimeter. Not a mil, that's a cubic centimeter, okay? But a cubic millimeter, which is 1,000. So if we have fewer than those, there's a variety of causes, all right? It could be blood loss. Maybe you have an ulcer. So one cause is hemorrhagic. Okay, you were in a car accident, or you were shot by a bow and arrow and it hit your femoral artery. Well, maybe your vein. You might not live long enough if it hit your femoral artery to suffer anemia. So hemorrhagic anemia is loss of both cells and volume. You have low white blood cells as well and low plasma. So overall, blood loss. Okay. Then the next word on your list is hemolytic. And this anemia is caused by the rupture, the lysis of red blood cells. And one of the most, so usually it's a parasitic cause. Obviously, you know, you can take your blood and put it in a hypoosmotic solution, and fluid would enter the red blood cell and cause it to rupture. All right, but most of us don't drink so much water that we cause that to happen in our body. So the usual cause is a parasitic infection, malaria being the most common parasite that infects red blood cells. In fact, black water fever malaria is when those red cells have ruptured and the hemoglobin turns the blood even darker. Okay, aplastic anemia affects the bone marrow. And there's a decrease in the stem cells. They may not know the cause of this, all right? It can be chemical. It could be some poison that was ingested. It could be radiation. It may be in some environmental cause that they haven't traced. And then we have what's illustrated on the board. One of the most common causes is insufficient iron in the diet. So the body's perfectly capable of making red blood cells, and they have hemoglobin in them. So your numbers would be correct, but the hemoglobin would be inadequate and the amount of iron would be inadequate. So when I was pregnant with the twins, they did a hemoglobin test, not every month when I went in, but it's around day, the 20th week or 28th week. 28th week. Normal hemoglobin values are 12 to 14 in women. Mine were 8. So my doctor said, well, you can either start taking iron pills or you can start eating a bunch more green leafy vegetables. Iron pills can make you constipated. So I elected to eat a bunch of kale every day. I mean, a literal bunch. I love kale and collard greens and that kind of stuff. It's my southern upbringing. So that's how I dealt with it. I just thought I was tired because I had twins. And the low hemoglobin and low oxygen content compounded that. So iron deficiency can usually be treated with diet. Okay? He knew better than to tell me to go home and eat liver. That wasn't good. But that because of all the red blood cells that are there, there's a rich source of iron there. Okay, pernicious anemia. I had a brain freeze this morning, and I have a faculty member, a fellow faculty member that sits in on the morning lecture. I had to ask him for help. Pernicious anemia is due to the lack of vitamin B12. That wasn't what I could remember. Vitamin B12 is a coenzyme that's used in the production. It's used for a lot of different things in the body. It's not just red blood cell production. but it's often touted to give you more energy. So take vitamin B12, go in for a vitamin B12 injection once a month. It increases the number of red blood cells, which increases the oxygen, which increases the ability of the body to make ATP. It's found in animal products, right? So as a vegetarian, I don't eat meat, fish, fowl, red beef, but I do eat animal products, right? So I will eat eggs and cottage cheese and yogurt and milk. And so that's how my kids and I get vitamin B12. My husband and my oldest son eat meat. The kids had their choice when they were 15, whether they wanted to eat meat or not. And they both had meat for their 15th birthday. The waitress thought we were really weird. Because they look at me and we're going out to eat at TGIF, and my husband and my oldest son each order a meat dish, and the kids look at me and go, "Can we, Mom?" And I was like, "Sure, it's your 15th birthday." And the waitress is like, so my daughter ordered a salad with chicken strips on top, and my son ordered a pasta that included chicken. And they each tasted it and said it was good, but they didn't finish it and took it home and never ate it again, the food that they took home. My daughter now occasionally, she will eat meat. She doesn't order meat when we go to Taco Bell. When we go out to a regular dinner, she says, "Well, I'm not going to eat any chicken that's fixed at a fast food restaurant." But then she informed me that she loves chicken McNuggets. So I'm like, okay.
That's really not.
Chicken story.
Yeah, so it's like, all right.
That's what that is.
And tri-tips, she's had so much sushi, she's sick of it now.
Why is it that some vegetarians, once they start eating meat again, they get sick?
Well, my son, I was surprised when my oldest son turned 15, we were at BJ's, and he ordered a club sandwich. It's like, I said, "Honey, don't you want to start off, like maybe have some of your dad's?" Because he would throw up when he was 5, and he would eat meat and he would throw up. So, but that was hot dogs, and who knows what's in hot dogs. But yeah, there's some people, there's various components of it that they...
Doesn't your GI tract just adjust to whatever you're
Yeah,
giving it?
over
So,
time.
like, if you're not used to eating
You eat
something-
parasites, you can adjust. I have a friend that went to medical school in the Caribbean, and the water there would give people diarrhea, so he'd make ice cubes out of it and add an ice cube to just kind of build up his tolerance to it. So, if your body doesn't take the vitamin B12, the cause could be diet. So a vegan or a true vegetarian, somebody that only ate plant products, would have to take vitamin B12 pills, right? Since I have milk products and eggs and that kind of stuff, I don't need to do so. My son still doesn't eat meat. My daughter, when she's with her friends, will. My youngest son, okay? But before that, we were